Hello, folks, and welcome back to the CryptX Live Wire. Today is Thursday, December 4th, and going to do a quick, brief market update as well as focus on some of the liquidity assets that we've seen. So starting off from this morning, we had an unemployment claims number in the U.S. We actually got a much lower forecast than anticipated, which traditionally should be bullish for USD and other assets like risk assets. So we do actually have USD up today a little bit, with some of the major other currencies continuing to be a little bit weaker. We continue to see stocks very close to their all-time highs, and this trend continues to be pretty strong, having a little bit of a red day today in the Qs and NASDAQ. If there was anything that I would complain about in terms of this bull market, would just be the fact that we want to see the NASDAQ lead in terms of the bull trend, high beta. And, typically we're looking for the NASDAQ to lead in a strong bull market and lead to the upside. And, right now, IWM and the Dow are actually leading to the upside. And I think that continues along the theme of liquidity leading up to interest rate cuts on December 10th. So next week is going to be very important. And something that I'm going to be watching very carefully is the dollar, as well as some other currencies, to see how it reacts off of that rate cut news. Maybe it's the start of, a new higher low here in the dollar and a resumption of the uptrend, because going into 2026 and typically midterm election years, the dollar's been pretty good. And also we are starting to reach a point in terms of the CCI and the technicals where we are in the dollar, in a similar level to where we were to the previous rate cut, which was, Wednesday, the 17th of September. During that time, price really sold off, into the rate cut, and then price bottomed. So, are we looking at some type of similar setup in the US dollar and other currencies where, the dollar's selling off into the rate cut, and then maybe we find some type of higher low bottom before pushing earlier? Either way, I think the technicals and fundamentals are somewhat interesting for that trade as they line up. Gold continues to be strong here and push its all-time high, despite the dollar being up and other currencies being down today. Interestingly, the best asset that we've seen in the market over the last couple of weeks, silver, in terms of the liquidity trade, is starting to show a little bit of slowdown in terms of the momentum. We are seeing a bearish candle at the top of an uptrend. The CCI is turning down, and we are, pretty widely diverged from the 20-period moving average. So it'll ultimately be interesting to see how that one reacts. One exception to the currencies being down aside from the dollar is the yen today. So not a whole lot of fireworks or, massive price action in this one, but considering the euro and, stuff like the franc is down almost 50 basis points, we see the yen up and neutral, and that's likely a result of the 10-year Japanese government bonds continuing to go higher. So as rates go higher in Japan, that should, in theory, be bullish for the yen. So we did see a little bit of a gap up in FXY today. We'll see if that ultimately continues. Bitcoin, kind of like silver today, struggling a little bit, but we did have a nice close above the 20-day moving average. Bitcoin seems to want to work its way back up to the 200-day. So and that's about, anywhere from 105 to 109. Looking back in 2022, we did something very similar where Bitcoin chopped around for a few months after a very strong downtrend, which is kind of similar to what we just saw. And, we just chopped around a little bit. Eventually, price worked its way back up to the 200-day and then fell off further. So I think proving whether or not Bitcoin can get above the 200-day, that's going to be a pretty strong line in the sand, in my opinion. I see a lot of folks and major market analysts talking about the potential of stuff being very, very bullish in 2026, whether it's AI or Bitcoin making new highs in Q1 or Q2 of 2026, because it's an extension of the business cycle. I've seen a lot of folks say that Bitcoin's no longer in a 4-year cycle. We're in a 5-year cycle now because the business cycle is going to be extended. I'm still a little bit skeptical. I want to be open to theories. I know my theory is not the only one that matters or has the probable outcome, right? But I think in terms of the 4-year cycle view, it continues to be very consistent with what we've seen historically in Bitcoin. So, I'm not really inclined to say this time is different yet. Maybe it is, but as of now, still kind of feels likely that we're going to make a lower high into the 200-day, but we'll see. One trade we had in the CryptX community earlier in the week was a Zcash short, and that one was closed out at 337. Zcash continues to rally a little bit now. It's been, what the classic traders back in, I think, the 1920s or 30s used to call stocks that moved around a lot footballs. They'd get kicked around either up or down in the market. Zcash is definitely a football right now for the volatility chasers. I'm not sure how we're going to end up in Zcash, right? I'm not really trying to predict the future, but what I will say is that we're starting to get to a level where the CCI is turning up from oversold territory. Zcash is trying to find a short-term bottom here, and has a significant divergence from the 20-day moving average. What's interesting to me about Zcash when looking at the futures funding rates, and I always find this somewhat amusing. So near our recent lows, we actually had funding rates were negative for Bitcoin and a lot of the other majors, meaning there were more shorts in the market than longs around our previous lows. Now that Zcash is, I'm not saying it's bottomed, but it definitely has put in a short-term bottom here after going from 300 to 350. There's actually more shorts in the market than longs. So the book is a little bit asymmetric, not a whole lot, but people are actually paying a short or a premium to get into their shorts on Zcash now, after it's fallen 30% in only a few days. So it's funny how those late shorts, jump in. I think that there's a possibility they might get squeezed up to, the 200-day or the 20-day moving average here. And then that's where I'm going to ultimately look for maybe a chance to short a lower high from a macro perspective in Zcash. We'll see. Between that and the dollar coming up here, I think those are interesting trades that I have been looking at. One thing I'll finish up with that I like to look at a lot is the altcoin season index. The way that we define an alt season, or how that alt season index is calculated, is when over 75 of the top 100 cryptocurrencies, or excuse me, if over 75% of the top 50 altcoins are outperforming Bitcoin over the last 90 days. As you can see here, Zcash is, the highest of those. And, now it's starting to show some weakness. So we, have not seen a whole lot of outperformance from altcoins, other than, a handful in terms of Bitcoin following the recent, sell-off in Bitcoin. But the one thing that I would highlight, and that I always kind of look at as we head into, the final weeks of Q4 here, is that each time we have seen the altcoin season index go above 75, you can't say always or every time in markets, right? Because they're not absolute. But ever since 2018, every single time the altcoin season index has reached a value of 75 or the overextended level, it ends up touching it goes below 25, and the altcoins see a long period of outperformance for about 3 to 6 months. And, while this could spike up here and do something like this, ultimately, I think the takeaway from this is that we still have not reached, we have not had that final flush on alts below the 25 level in terms of the altcoin season index. So, if we get to that level and start spending a couple, 3 to 6 months under here, that's when I would look for, altcoins to start outperforming again. But right now, it's hard to say, having it in the middle of the range. Really, all that I can say is that historically, every time we've been above 75, we have had a return to 25 in, not the too distant future. So with that in mind, thank you guys. Make sure you check out 2-week free trial on www.stickytrades.com/CryptX and get a free 2-week trial. And yeah, we'll see you next time. Take care.